Hello, welcome to Deep Down. I'm your host, Jordan Hunt, and today I'm very excited to be having a conversation with my lifelong collaborator at this point, Olivia Chaney, multi-instrumentalist, singer, songwriter, composer extraordinaire. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. Lizzie, can't wait to have a chat with you. Say hi to all your new fans.
I did a really awkward chin hug, but Eilish.
Welcome, Olivia Chaney.
Hello.
To Deep Down. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I feel like it's a real coup for me to have you on my podcast. I feel like I must mention your name at least twice an episode from the first season, because you've made such an impact, not only on my musical career, but my life as a friend as well as a fellow artist. What I've learned from you in terms of a musical community, I thought originally antithetical to how I worked. I thought I was just a composer and it's a very solitary world.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've witnessed you in that sense over the years and have learned to almost imitate it to the point where now it's like, oh, no, it's just habit and now I get it. But it was really not natural to me at first.
See, I think I have a kind of an imposter syndrome with that stuff sometimes as well. I don't always feel like it's natural.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, why do you think I mainly just play with you over 20 years? Probably partly just because you're so special and unique and irreplaceable, and so I've sometimes I worry I'm unhealthily dependent on that special quality.
Well, I'll always be there.
But I do also sometimes think it's almost, separate from you. It's maybe a shortcoming in myself. It's a bit like I am with humans in general. It's just I need the whole holistic total thing. I need the intelligence, the emotion, the sensitivity, the detail, the empathy, and I feel like that then comes across in whatever we play. And it's not so much about what instrument you're playing or what note you're playing, it's the whole sort of mood thing. And you can't get that from a session musician or someone that you haven't invested your music in for a decade or whatever. So I don't always feel like I am very good at doing the communal musical thing. I feel like I'm quite soloistic composery as well, so it's nice that you think I'm not.
How do you view community versus working in solitude as an artist?
I think it's changing for me all the time. Now that I don't live in London, that's been quite a wrench and a change and a shock, happened with COVID in between and becoming a mother for the first time and getting dropped by a record label all at the same time. So it's been very, very momentous shift, and it's made me have to think about, did I have a musical community? If I did, where are they? Do they still exist? And actually, essentially, it's been quite sort of affirming, because especially with this more recent record and self-releasing, again calling upon that old community, they've sort of shown themselves to still be there, and hopefully me for them as well. But if on some level you are a composer, that there just is a necessary solitude to that's unavoidable. There has to be, just like a painter or a poet or an architect or anyone who's making something, I think there has to be a moment when you're on your own. I know that a punk band is going to say no, the whole point is you egalitarianly all make it together in the room, but we're not. I think we are both more soloistic creatures in that way.
For anyone who's listening and not watching, where are we in this gorgeous setting?
Well, we've sort of jumped ship to my mum's house around the corner, which is also a bonkers renovation project of a house like the one I live in. But because we are doing some work in the room where I normally write music, where my piano is, and it was just such chaos in there, I asked my mum if we could come to her beautiful living room where her and my stepdad have pretty much made everything in the room, from the shelves to the hand-dyed curtains and the ceramics and all the, she's amazing. So big inspiration aesthetically. So that's where we are, in the town of York, where amazingly I now live after 20 years in London.
How long have you lived here?
Well, now I've been here about 6 years, I think, which also seems extraordinary to me, but
too.
I've
Is
done
it
a
that
lot
long?
in that time. Yeah, I mean, a lot has changed. Got married, 2 kids, renovated a house, put out a few records. Just, yeah, lots happened.
Can you give us a backstory, a little introduction for anyone who doesn't yet know who you are? I mean, I've been singing your praises, like I said, for as long as I have been talking out loud to anyone who'll listen.
I, for want of better phrases, I call myself a songwriter now. I get called a folk singer, which sometimes I shirk against because in the folk world, that implies that you only sing traditional music. And so that's why I shirk against it, essentially, because I feel like predominantly I write my own songs. So it's a funny term. Like if you're in the sort of rock pop world, and we talk about Laura Marling or Marcus Mumford, and they used to get called folk, and that was also a tricky thing because technically they didn't sing any folk songs. So it's like the term folk is a you know, you could say a problematic word, or it's just a useful giant umbrella term. But anyway, I'm certainly, I mean, some people laugh at me when I have a problem with it because they're just like, you're so folk and you're so acoustic and like, obviously you're a folk singer. So it's a kind of minutiae issue.
Has it been useful for you to be labelled?
I feel
folk
like
singer?
it's been really unuseful. That's the problem.
Right.
I think it's been problematic for me. I don't feel like it's been a helpful term. But again, you know, it's obviously just my stuff, maybe stuff that I still need to work through. Yeah, it just feels like the term sort of negates a lot of the other influences that, you know, that are in my music, that I hear and know are in my music and that I grew up listening to, things that I've been obsessed with. So particularly the contemporary classical stuff, which is sort of in a way how we met and are part of our bond hugely, and also sort of more indie songwriters. And a lot of those songwriters, you know, someone like Sufjan Stevens, for example, is like so inspired by sort of contemporary classical or 20th and 21st century classical music as well. I feel like folk is just not necessarily part of that. So
How might you correct the label? Because I know that you're not only folk.
yeah,
That's not where your training started.
no,
Or tell us about your training or your musical heritage,
yeah.
if not in folk.
That's how the label came about, I guess, also partly because not my training, but in childhood, particularly my dad playing and singing, it was very much folk. And the funny thing for me now is I almost feel old enough that it's like all sort of suddenly really en vogue with like Timothée Chalamet playing Dylan, and it's like that's what I grew up with, like that era of Bob Dylan and then all of the musicians around that scene, and also a very interesting transatlantic conversation that was going on. Dylan was inspired directly by Martin Carthy, who sang at my wedding, who's based up here, you know, iconic English folk musician. So it is sort of part of my heritage or my upbringing. Also, the listening as I was growing up was like very broad, and there was lots of opera and lots of sort of more pop. And then I studied classical piano, a bit of cello, was in a really amazing, wacky choir. I sang a lot of plain chant as a kid, particularly Hildegard von Bingen, which was like amazing privilege. Toured Europe as like a little girl with a medieval psaltery, and yeah, singing loads of plain chant and also singing like really contemporary music. Like we always had people write new music for us. Students at Oxford and stuff would sort of write operas for these young girls, and a lot of Benjamin Britten. So I think actually that choir was like hugely informative.
I always forget about the cello because obviously you're a multi-instrumentalist.
I mean, I can't play the cello now. I feel like it was useful just in terms of like having a sensibility, or like even working with you as a string player. It's just like at least I sort of
What's possible?
vaguely know what's going on or what you're doing, have an empathy towards it. Yes. Whereas you may have noticed that I have never worked with a brass player in my life, and there's probably a reason, and just like don't sort of relate to some instrument.
Tell us about your instrumental history, because obviously you learned classical piano at school and again used it at university, but you play guitar and Indian harmonium.
Yeah, I've actually forgot about that because it's so long ago now. But yeah, at the time it felt so momentous. I was born in Italy, grew up in Oxford, had like really sort of musical childhood in Oxford, and then like had a very wild wild teens, parents broke up, whole family sort of disbanded in different directions around the country, and I managed to get a scholarship to Cheetham School of Music in Manchester, which kind of saved my bacon in many ways. I was always going to audition as a first study pianist, and you have to have a second study. And I was like, I just don't think they're going to let me in as a second study cellist, so I'll just sing, because like I sing in a choir.
Yeah, second nature.
Yeah, and then what happened is basically it pretty quickly transpired that my piano playing was really not up to the standard of like a hothouse like Cheetham's. So even though they'd given me a joint first study place, it was like very daunting being in the piano department in a place like that. It was sort of horrendous, to be honest.
Your piano's not bad.
I think I was probably always going to be a singer, but it was very nurtured, and I'm forever grateful that I had a really, really special teacher who really gave us as kids, really teenagers, like the ability to sort of just really sing with your own voice, even though technically we were sort of studying like operatic techniques. It's like when you're that young, you can't sort of go and sing Wagner or something. So really it was about finding your own voice and having a like healthy technique. That was what she was big on. Although there were many things that I needed to slough off about sort of classical pedagogical training that I actually have big reservations about.
With your voice, you mean?
No, I think the vocal technical stuff was very helpful.
Okay.
I think the way she taught, in particular, Jane Highfield, when it was focusing on like vocal technique, it was just quite pure and quite technical, almost like an athlete. I think what I have a problem with is like, and it happened in Chet's on numerous occasions, where it's like a violin sort of guru who then like, you hear endless stories at music college and at these pre-conservatoire schools of like, no, you're playing all wrong. Like, don't play for a year. Don't even pick up your bow for a year. You are terrible. You've got it all wrong. And it's just like this kind of cruel, like, let's crush people and build them back up sort of thing.
Hardcore.
Yeah, really hardcore, and also just lots of approaches to the way the music. I mean, I just have so many issues with the way classical music is taught and presented, hence not sort of staying in that field in any strict way. In terms of like trajectory or chronology of instruments, then like at 16 you're like, oh, what A-levels are you going to choose in relation to where you're going to go to uni or music college? And I was a real crisis for me. I was just like, I want to write. I was already writing songs, really kind of quite cheesy poppy sounding songs, and I absolutely was like in love with still a lot of classical music. I was accompanying myself a lot. Although I was doing all this classical study, what I think I really loved doing when I was at Chet's, like in the evenings and practice rooms, was accompanying myself playing Handel or Schumann in particular. And but again, like, it's so ridiculous to say, but in the minutiae of the sort of classical training pedagogical world, that was already quite unorthodox.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at how little it's done.
You can hear your Schumann self-accompanied leader in some of your music, like House on a Hill, for example.
Yeah.
Just like...
Do you remember when we played that really lovely National Sawdust in New York? Can't remember if it's in Brooklyn or Manhattan.
Brooklyn,
yeah, in Brooklyn. This couple came up to us at the end, and I think she was an opera singer or something. She was just like, I love House on the Hill, because it's like, for me, it's like all my favourite, like, not classical music, but then I can hear that you love Schumann in there as well. And it wasn't intentional at all. I wasn't thinking about Schumann at all when I wrote that. I was completely like immersed in nature. I actually had... Sorry, Grandma.
Don't
We're
worry.
rolling. Okay.
I have to catch myself really, because I have trajectory of questions and so on. But obviously we've known each other so long.
Yeah.
And we've spent, I don't know how many days of our lives in the back of a car driving around America on tour and lots of other places around the world. It's funny, when I think of you as a multi-instrumentalist, I always forget the singing part, which is
really
an enormous
that's nice.
like, training. For me, that's just like, oh, that's just the unfiltered that just comes out. But of course, it's an enormous training, and it's been really impactful on the way I sing. I don't think I really confidently sung until I started to sing backing vocals with you.
Until I bullied you to.
Basically,
I can remember the moment in my crazy shared house in Clapton, and I wanted you to sing something with me. What was it? Maybe it was the refrain of Swimming in the Longest River.
It might be.
It might have been
I
that
have a
song.
little musical notebook of things that you were teaching me.
Is that one of the first things?
Yeah. It's so long ago, but
I
that
think
is
it
actually...
might have been that. And then there was the Baby D thing where everyone covered a song.
Yeah.
And I was covering, I can't remember which song, did some epic arrangement that I could never play again. And I said, come and do that. And then you just like killed the room with On the Day I Died, which just unbelievable.
Yeah, it was my first gig as a singer.
Yeah.
So I was very grateful for that.
And kind of a songwriter, arranger as well.
I'd never challenged myself to put it together. I think it's the most important and useful thing about that, besides the platform, was the deadline.
Yeah.
Because it so kind of wrangles you into focus.
Yeah.
Which is why it's always nice to have fellow artists to kind of like be accountable.
Yeah.
When we met, I was officially had my composer hat on.
Yeah.
And you had your singer hat on.
Yeah.
And I didn't really even know you as anything other than a singer at that first meeting back at the Britten Peers School.
Yeah.
Where we did an electronic or contemporary music.
It was called New Music, New Media.
Oh my God.
I know,
well
because I'm now, now after 10 years of like relentlessly touring and recording in America, and now like got a family, and I just am working more in England again, thank goodness. And so I'm sort of reconnecting back with Britten Peers and Aldeburgh, and hopefully we'll be doing some really lovely projects there over the next year or two. And so I was just like going back through all of it and my relationship with them, and they were reminding me as well that we met on New Music, New Media, and
they reminded you.
Yeah, as well.
Oh,
because actually the new director was
Yeah.
around then, but she's sort of risen the ranks. And
I thought everybody had left.
yeah, so did I. But it's actually really interesting how loyal some of the people are, and it's just a kind of place where you like, it attracts a certain like loyalty, I think.
Yeah.
So there was Anna Meredith, Emily Hall. I mean, basically loads of just and Raki Singh.
Yeah, because I already knew Raki sort of peripherally because we were in the same year.
Northern.
Yeah. But composers and violinists didn't really talk very much, didn't really interact. And then after that, I think you'd probably been playing with Raki.
Yeah.
Or starting what you might call as your current career.
Yeah, exactly.
At some point, I took over her gig.
Well, I know, but it was very different. And also the irony is that actually Raki then was like, she's kind of not come full circle, but she's now really like, you can see the trajectory. But I feel like she was still, Manchester Collective and more like a name in contemporary music. But actually at that time, I feel like it was not so clear cut for her, and she was like more classical, traditional classical, and had a whole childhood of sort of being like put in the classical world. I don't know about you, but for she and I, like that week in Aldeburgh was really special because it just felt like a bit of a breath of fresh air after 4 years of Cheatham's and me feeling like totally constrained, and then 4 years at the Royal Academy on a jazz degree, which was just like
That's an interesting blip.
so wrong, and sort of, great to be at the Academy and amazing, and like, met amazing people there, but sort of not quite the course that I should have been on. But I think
it didn't quite overlap. I think you graduated and I did my master's.
No, then you were doing your master's, just as I left, I think.
Do you carry any of that jazz degree with you? Or even as a kind of reaction against it?
No, I actually, that's a really good question, instead of me just like moaning about things, and I didn't mean it to sound like that, because I did have sort of an amazing time there, like as a person, but I just musically, I think I was just allergic to being constrained. And the moment that I realised that they were going to like put me on a bebop project and make me scat like Ella Fitzgerald, I was just like, what? I thought I was here as a creative, because that was, they kind of gave me a scholarship on the spot, late audition. And it was Gerald Presenza who was the head, and he was just like, yeah, we want like creative people like you, and you should come and be a first study piano player and singer. And I was like, no, I can't do jazz piano. I was really terrified of that, and I said, please don't give me that. I guess because I'd done joint first piano and singing at church. There are really a lot of things kind of profoundly that I do take. I don't know if it was directly from what I was taught on the degree per se, but I think from being in that community of musicians, many of whom I'm still friends with now, and I did a lot of free improv. And I was also like listening to a lot of Ligeti and sort of more like whatever, like second Viennese school composers, which sort of overlaps with like free improv, I think, and extended voice technique stuff. Like that was sort of my jam a lot of the time at the academy. Through doing a lot of free improv and extended voice technique stuff, I feel like I'm using that all the time as a performer now. Like every millisecond I'm using it. I feel like that informs my timing, my phrasing, my swing. And actually it's funny because that element of Joni, I kind of feel like I identify with her on that level, although I'm not like a deep jazzer like she is, and she sort of really like, you know, made albums with Charles Mingus and stuff like that. I don't sort of necessarily love like traditional.
But maybe some of the Joni music that is kind of more in the popular realm, that people don't know the hardcore jazz stuff, they wouldn't even realise that it's informed by
Exactly. That's where I kind of identify, because I think with her it's like it's a similar thing where it's to do with swing. It's like, having said which, there's some really trad folk singers who sing things in a more sort of seemingly rigid way, and that has a kind of brilliance and beauty to it as well, or like more straight. I don't know, like Peggy Seeger or Shirley Collins or something like that. But ultimately, anyone playing any music, whether it's like Murray Pariah playing sort of Mozart piano concerto, or Joni singing her own songs, or Martin Carthy singing a trad English folk song, it's like the people who move me the most have their own kind of swing. It's like the way they push and pull with a phrase. And it's often to do with the voice against everything else, like the push and pull of the vocal line, which is why I find it hard to not play for myself. Like,
you have to provide the kind of matrix,
that tension.
That
well, it's like I know that
off.
if I'm playing the piano or the guitar, I'm kind of laying down the, like, not metronomic thing, but it's like my voice can like dance or play with that. And that's, yeah.
I can see that that is one of the areas you might have struggled with people you're playing with that you don't know intimately, just to find that kind of middle ground where you can trust that they're giving you that pulse that you need to play.
Well, that's like, for example, making a record with like a band like the Decemberists or something, who are just like quite kind of straight ahead, like indie rockers. I think we just didn't speak the same language in that way. And it was fine once I kind of accepted that they weren't necessarily going to give me the kind of push and pull that like a classically trained or, you know, contemporary classical or like a jazzer or whatever kind of person might.
Seeing as you mentioned them, tell us about that whole collaboration, because you always give a very funny anecdote in your live shows about the name of the band you ended up using rather than the Decemberists and Olivia Chaney, or vice versa. And your Grammy nomination.
That was a surprise.
So you released a record under the name Offa Rex.
Yeah.
Good choice.
The 8th or 9th century Mercian king. It's kind of ironic because I then since married a medievalist who's like literally probably a world expert on Offa Rex and all those things. It was kind of ironic. It was obviously meant to be. Yeah. I love the name now, but it was just like, it was just a bit of a wrangle with like then record label, then manager. Just everyone was like really trying to sort of push and pull in different directions, and you know, just a lot of egos. Like yeah.
Oh, let's come on to that at some point.
Yeah.
Labels and managers and egos. Oh my.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No. But it's like it's a large part of your journey that I've witnessed, kind of at first hand, and it's been very informative. And in my youth, I always remember feeling like I learned a lot of my life through not watching other people's mistakes, but watching other people, you know, a lot of vicarious figuring stuff out.
It's a good way to do it.
Because of my natural caution.
More efficient than me, just like in the hot water struggling.
But you were brave and bold, and you've actually lived, so...
Foolish, no.
What I wanted to touch on was your influences. When I was jotting down some things I wanted to talk about with you, always musical influences comes to mind, and for some reason I always avoid writing that down, because I think, for me, I not that I denounce them, but I don't carry them around with me. But I feel like something I've learned from you is that you somehow carry everything with you all the time, You were talking...
That sounds heavy.
Well, maybe it is, but you were talking about how amazing that Albury course was for you and Raki in terms of being free and trying a new kind of music and a new way of playing and interacting with composers. Whereas I, at the time as a composer, I just thought like, am I just kind of going through the motions of having been on an electronic music course? Because I've never had an inclination to make electronic music or produce in that way. But for me, what the takeaway was working with performers like who were so encouraging and so
Like
enthusiastic.
up for it, yeah. I think there might be a little bit of, because we've toured a lot together and you've like had to sit through me doing sort of loads of tedious radio interviews in the States and stuff and England, you've maybe heard more about my so-called like influence. I mean, it's not so-called, they are my influences. You've kind of listened to me have to like tell those stories a lot. So I wonder if that's maybe, and also it's probably my like overly self-conscious thing, like I have to explain what I do. It's also to do with the fact that on stage, like if I'm not just doing a show that's like an album launch, like even the show we played a month ago in King's Place, it was like so curated and it had like such a mix of stuff, and it had trad folk songs and it had Purcell and it had, loads of my songs that we'd been playing for years. But it's maybe my own problem of feeling I have to sort of justify myself a bit. I like to think that I don't sort of think about those influences all the time in a way.
I see your perspective on my perspective.
Yeah.
Because what I would say, one of the things I find in common with you is that where we're at on a public platform as selling ourselves as effectively making these products, which is a record of songs that we've written and performing, recording ourselves, which is very easily digestible for most of the world. And yet most of the world would have no idea of like all of these other subtle and quite esoteric influences that have informed us to get to this stage.
Yeah, and maybe it goes back to the folk question as well. I think it's probably to do with me like trying to explain to people that it's not just folk. So
yeah, maybe. In one way, I don't know, I've got blinkers on or something. As soon as something is in the past, I sort of let go and forget. I really need to try and remember and carry with me what's already there deep down somewhere. My love for Debussy and Ligeti, as you mentioned, they inform every single musical choice I make when writing just a very simple song with like very static chords.
I bet they do, yeah.
It's very hard to unpick and try and explain that to
and
someone.
Your love of Mariah.
And Mariah Carey,
It's all in there.
So,
and mine too.
And yours.
I sang her so much when I was little. Her and Whitney Houston were like my two great heroines.
Yeah. And so I have been party to your official musical output. I've been really, really lucky to be so heavily infused and involved on all of your major records. We started with The Longest River, which you were saying your perspective listening back to it now.
Not that I sit by the way and often listen to it, but sometimes if I have to select a track for something and I like just hear 30 seconds and I'm just like, who is that? Oh my goodness, sounds so formal. My polite word for that record is like austere, but I mean really it's... Oh. No, I do sort of love it. I mean, sometimes maybe it's just partly moving because it's like the old you and it's like almost the baby you or whatever. And in fact, it's 10 years this year and I am still hoping that I might put out the vinyl, like a little limited edition vinyl of it. It'd be really great.
I always remember your dad saying in gigs around that time, Olivia, just sing the tune.
Yeah.
And then you got to the recording studio and you just sang the tune.
Did I?
And I was like, oh.
I don't look back on that process of making that record fondly.
Okay.
Overall, I would say it was hard, and I would say it was like a very classic getting signed kind of story.
That was your first record with Nonsuch?
Yeah, it was the first record with Nonsuch, and it was like, I got signed. The record didn't come out until 2 years later. I had wrangles with them about the front cover, about the artwork. I had wrangles with them about the fact that when they signed me, I had no management, no agent, nothing. I literally just like got myself out to New York and played a sort of illegal show and had bootleg EPs and got signed. And it was a real like old school story. And I just kind of thought, great, I've done it. You know, now I've got the backing and the people who believe me, and yeah, I can relax. And it was like, little did I know that a whole other journey of sort of complexity and intensity had just begun. And yeah, and they were just like, yeah, so we love the record you've made. It's great. We've got the masters and we're not releasing it until you find yourself a manager. And I was just like, what?
I'd kind of forgotten that.
It was very like a very hard line. And so then there was just this like part of me sort of arrogantly or otherwise. It's like, I don't need a manager. I don't want a manager.
Yeah, you got to a certain stage where you were
doing it.
You were very tempting to a label because you had proven you'd already done it. Like you said, you'd already self-released. You had an enormous mailing list. You could sell out gigs. I'm not quite sure what they thought they could offer you other than their contact book.
They wanted it to grow. And also it was that thing of like, you know, if you can make it in America, then you're sorted everywhere kind of attitude. But actually what I feel slightly happened and was part of why I maybe wrangled a bit too much was like what I had slogged my guts out building up in London then was completely negated in a way. There were many years where I spent more of the year in America than in England, I think. And whilst it was like great and really fun adventures and like don't regret any of it, it just felt like I never found the management who were like up for kind of continuing where I felt things had left off in this country. But maybe that was just never possible because what I had done in London was so grassroots and sort of genuine and just like going from like playing in the back of a pub to like playing a slightly bigger venue and actually starting to get paid to play shows. And it's also just a classic signing story of it just went from like what I just described to like corporate. And I struggled with that and I still struggle with that. And it's probably why I'm back to being grassroots and DIY because I just doesn't sit that comfortably with me.
They said you needed a manager before they would release the record.
Yeah.
And there were all these other jobs as well that people were in theory fulfilling, kind of publishing agreements and agents and so on. And in a way, you'd already done those jobs as well with your self-releasing. I actually don't know your position at the moment, but are there roles that you wish were fulfilled that you didn't have to do as a self-releasing artist now?
I think I've got to a stage where I don't have that wish anymore because I feel like I've experienced so many permutations of different people fulfilling those roles, you know, taking on the title of the role and me feeling a bit like it's not being fulfilled. That is not to therefore then say that I think I can do it better. I wish I was like Maggie Rogers or something who like, you know, blew up. Wasn't she like doing a business music course at the same time? There's a few, they tend to be female, the ones I can think of, very different styles, the ones I'm thinking of, but like a few female sort of singers, musicians in very different genres who just are, I think, really schooled up on like legal stuff, business stuff, and they've like got quite far self-managing. And I don't know what their situations are like later on, but they've like really sort of made big names for themselves. And alas, I'm not that. That's the thing. In another life, if I had more time, I would like go to business school and I would like learn all that stuff and I would learn about copyright. I mean, even Ray, you know, she is, I think, a bit that, partly because she went through the painful journey of being stuck on a label and sort of being mistreated on label. And so, you know, she knows the business. And so now when she kind of comes back as like Phoenix, it's like she knows what she's doing. Yeah. I'm kind of not that savvy about the business side of stuff still, but like intellectually, emotionally.
I feel like it was eye-opening just to see other aspects of how the world works and different levels on which the music industry works.
Just for me, it's like a philosophical thing often of it like comes back to corporate thing and all the kind of middlemen coming in thing. It's like, I never felt, I need everyone around me to be like authentic. I never felt comfortable with like all these people that I hardly knew, just like taking 20% of like what we had slogged our guts out to do. It just didn't like philosophically sit right with me. But if I had just sat with it and been patient and kind of bitten my tongue a lot, maybe it would have blown up in a different way. I don't know, but I don't really regret not sort of following that through because I just don't feel like that's even the kind of music I make.
Yeah, well, what would have blown up? I
Exactly.
don't think it would have been you.
And this, I mean,
as you are. truly.
Yeah, and this is the other
version.
thing, is it's not to get into the particularities of like the particular record label I was on, but the bigger picture is that without being like rude about anyone or any particular label, I'm a very small fry version of it, but it really does happen that when you are there and when the label you're on is owned by Warner Brothers, there is a filtering down pressure to conform, to homogenize, to neaten out the like messy edges. I mean, even literally down to like symbolically making the longest river, I had to fight back to catch the noise in the room on the end of the sessions of each recording. Like for me, that symbolism is like kind of a beautiful like symbolism. It was like, don't get rid of like the creak on the piano stool at the end of the song. Like I want the room in there. Is that just me being folky that I kick against being called? You know, I mean, even dear Leo Abrahams, who I made the record with, who's a dear friend, you know, he was like, do you just want to make a field recording? I mean, maybe that is the problem. Maybe it is just actually about, but for me, that's not just folk, that's like a bigger thing. That's kind of punk. It's like
the knowledge that you do have and what is possible, and that, you know, the incredible classical recordings that would totally not even bat an eyelid at questioning that kind of real nature of a live recording.
yeah, that's interesting, thinking of classical recordings being that way.
You know,
Yeah.
the kind of Glenn Gould kind of grunts and sniffs, and
Yeah.
it's
And
exactly
Keith Jarrett, Grunts and Sniffs,
yeah, it's exactly
ECM.
why
We love those records. Yeah.
I can see why you see it's like it's such a simple thing. Like, what is the pushback about? It's why do you care so much?
Because when there's big money involved, even if it's not directly being invested in you as a smaller artist on a bigger label, it's like there's financial pressures and spreadsheets, and through that unavoidably comes maybe even illogical requirement to neaten things and make them presentable.
Do you think that's a uniquely American filtering
No,
system?
I think it's like a sort of, I mean, I think it's just a sort of corporate thing that happens. But the irony, as we all know, there are so many stories of the artists who actually are really famous and really successful are often the ones who somehow pushed through and actually were just their gritty selves and fought against all of that. But there are also lots of like tragedy stories where people were just like crushed by the system. And actually even thinking of like the sound in the room of a recording, someone who I'm thinking about in a particular recording is Mark Hollis. I don't even know Talk Talk's music that much, but his solo record, he had an awful time with record labels and was always kicking against being made to conform. And that solo record is interestingly so much about that, and just like hearing every creak in the room and every sound and every breath, and want to take inspiration from that record, from hopefully at least the next or the record after that I make of my reworkings of Purcell. But it's interesting you saying about classical recordings, because I kind of want it to be the best of like the old school, not too heavily digitized, edited classical recordings, maybe even pre-digital classical recordings with someone more in the sort of pop world like him, and then mixed with like a field recording. And I want to sort of have something of that spirit, but be playing my renditions of a classical composer and see sort of what that does.
It's so funny how much of the details of your performance have sort of educated me as a singer, I would say, because I was
Just
not
watching
really
me endlessly fuck up.
No, I mean, you know, until a few years ago, I'd never had a singing lesson. The only advice I had was
Amazing.
from you when you were guiding my backing vocals, and I learned an awful lot very quickly. The way you sometimes use your breath to divide the beat in a bar, I don't know how conscious you are of it, or the
think I
way
am
that you
conscious of it.
finish your consonants right at the end of the breath at the right place.
See, that's just like a fully classical thing. I
But
hope
I
I
don't-
don't do it in a classical way now, but I'm
No,
just,
no.
yeah.
From my perspective, I was like, oh, yes, that's the answer that I needed. That's why I was so unsatisfied with the idea of being a singer for so long, because I had never heard anything in the popular sphere that really clicked with the way my brain was working as a composer,
That's really
classically
funny. I've
trained.
never heard you say that. That's really interesting. There are some very, very famous pop singers and indie bands where, like, I think the music and the writing is incredible, but especially like before the era of the internet, I don't even get how people can understand most of the lyrics.
Because they're just not pronounced.
It's entirely inaudible. And actually, funnily enough, there is a parallel with like what I think of as bad opera singing. I think most trained opera singers, as part of what I had a problem with the opera world or that teaching, is that they're so obsessed with the sound of their voice. And maybe there's a parallel with certain kind of indie singers like Tom York or something, where it's all about the beauty and the sound of the voice, and actually the text just gets completely neglected. My sort of chip on my shoulder, or like my fear that I would be criticised for like almost going into sort of Sarah Brightman category, a music theatre singer where you're like enunciating everything really. Like, I hope I don't sound like that, and I definitely don't try to. I'm definitely trying to strike a really fine balance between all of those things. I don't want it to be beautiful for the sake of being beautiful, and actually that's something that used to like sort of upset me a little bit, especially when we were touring in America and we'd like play all those like weird and wonderful clubs, and some person would come up to me at the end, and maybe they like just didn't get the songs, or like, and they'd just be like, your voice is so beautiful, and I'd like somehow take offense, because I'd be like, oh right, so you didn't actually like the music. I definitely don't want my voice to just be beautiful for the sake of it.
It just happens to be stunning.
No, shut up. No, but it's interesting what you were saying about my latest album, Circus of Desire, and that there's something almost theatric about some of the delivery of the songs there, because I do think I'm still learning to be freer with the way I use my voice. But you see, that is maybe to do with, am I still sloughing off classical training? It's a double-edged sword, I think, being classically trained. It's like there is a lot to slough off.
I think there's a reason I'm
huge
drawn
benefits.
to still working with you, obviously. Talking about enunciation and diction really reminds me of my early years at the Northern and the Academy with my old friend Catherine Broderick. Who's
amazing singer, yeah.
And she spent a year on Erasmus in Leipzig, becoming fluent in German in order to be able to sing Lieder and so on. And she was already amazing before she started at music college at 18. And I always remember just her having incredible diction. And compared to all the other students on her course, I was just like, I cannot understand a word anyone's saying.
No.
And you elevate every single thing you sing just because I can actually understand the lyric, or hear the lyrics if it's in a different language. And at the same time, now that I'm having singing lessons with my incredible teacher, Louise Shepherd, who is also a theatre director, she trains a lot of actors, not only how to sing, but just how to speak, I think in this kind of Estiel training.
Yeah, well, that was my singing teacher's training as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's always talking about starting with the words, which has really taken a while to sink in to me in terms of my understanding of it. We were talking about Cynthia Erivo's version of Defying Gravity, which she hadn't actually seen the film. I think she might have heard the song. And she said, well, yeah, it's because she went to RADA. It's because she's not musical theatre trained. She is an actor who just happens to have an incredible voice.
Sing. Yeah.
And she's just taking you on a journey of understanding the words.
Emotion. Yeah, the emotion.
Exactly.
I know, but there is, sorry, I'm cutting you off now, but
No.
I think there is still a scary fine line. And I even sometimes catch myself, like, if you're being an actor who's emoting, it can sound really kitsch.
Sure.
But if you're being a really good actor,
yeah.
who is not even acting and just being the emotion.
Channeling,
then,
I think
then you're doing it.
You definitely channel. And you were talking earlier about Circus of Desire, and I wrote down one specific lyric from Galop, which is one of my favourite songs on your new record. How can I get off this ride? Which for me, at the moment, because life is so busy and saturated, really resonates.
There were a few songs that we captured in the big live room. Do you remember the studio in Manhattan?
Of our studios.
Yeah. A bit like Shelter as well. My second record, I made, I don't know what fraction, but like quite a lot of it in Thomas's tiny cupboard of a room next to Nico Muli's room. And then every now and then, depending on the song, we'd sort of go into the big sort of glamorous live room with beautiful acoustic, already wooden, and it would often be late at night. But I mean, with Circus of Desire, it felt more fun because I didn't have like a huge record label backing me, and we were doing it like on a shoestring, and it was literally late at night because we weren't really paying for the room. We were having to go in the room when no one was in there, and it wasn't hired out. And that had a kind of magic to it, which is, again, like, I guess there's an overarching theme of like my anti or whatever establishment thing. I think just the combination of having worked with Thomas before, maybe even him having matured and changed as a person and a producer, me definitely having changed and matured. I'd like had my daughter by then. I was meant to make the record when I was pregnant with her and had the flights booked, and then COVID happened and the ban came down and my life sort of really...
It's terrible timing.
It was like crazy. I remember all my family, because I was quite heavily pregnant. You're not allowed to fly in your third trimester, so I booked the return flight like the day before the cutoff of my third trimester, and I was like, I've got it all planned out. It's going to be great. And actually, you know, I'll never forget, like, Trump announcing the ban. I kind of knew, I was like, right, my life is going to really change now. Yeah, so it took another few years to get back out there and do it. But anyway, a kind of maturity and the motherhood thing of like, you know, hopefully with some things I'm still learning. I'm definitely a like overthinking, over sort of anxious person generally, but I think motherhood does make you more earthed, and at its best it does sometimes help someone like me, you know, which just doesn't come naturally to me.
I was originally going to ask you about the difference in the studio recording at RAC for The Longest River and then writing your record Shelter in the house on the hill without electricity and so on.
Yeah.
And then eventually, you know, kind of figuring it out to work in New York with Thomas Bartlett on Circus of Desire.
Yeah.
And it suddenly occurred to me, I doubt you could really do that now, that kind of writing process, or maybe would you disagree?
I definitely can't now, because as some other mums I know have used phrases like, how old's your youngest? And I'm like, oh, nearly 2. And they're like, oh, darling, you're still in the trenches. Like, other mums use terms like this. Yeah, I definitely don't have that kind of writing time. I mean, look, like some mums put their kids in childcare every day from 9 to 5 and they like crack on and have jobs. And I have a job, but I work my job around trying to be the mother that I want to be. And that is a really hard way of doing it, and it's exhausting, can be really stressful, but I hope that I won't regret it when they're older and I'm older.
I remember being on stage with you at King's Place thinking, wow, our most recent gig, and I know we've been playing together for decades now, just thinking I can't do what you do and I could never do what you do. I used to think that before you became a mother, and now you still are doing the incredible stuff you do, and you're also a mother. How do you do it?
Well, firstly, you do the incredible stuff you do, so that's rubbish to
Thanks.
say any of that. But yeah, in terms of like trying to sort of hold something together on stage and try and commune with an audience and try and move people and sort of get in the zone when you know that there's like 2 tiny dependent humans sort of backstage, and one of them might be screaming and one of them's trying to sleep and one of them's hungry. That's the thing of like choosing to kind of carry on being a musician and some kind of a creative, like artist, whatever, once you've become a mum, is like, for me, a big decision. And when you sort of make that commitment and you somehow on some level are saying, I am going to keep doing that, in a way enforces a kind of mental discipline, because it's like, would be so easy to be distracted or be stressed. So it's like, there's a kind of paradoxical thing of, I'm saying it's like harder, but in a way it helps focus you even more, because you just like have to bring it. Otherwise you just fall apart.
I don't think I'll ever experience motherhood or being a parent. I can't imagine it's going to happen now. And I don't know if I've ever really had the inclination. What's really fascinating, seeing you as one of your close friends, but also just an outsider and a musician that you've worked with, is that although obviously there's a compromise and a shift when one becomes a parent, and especially a mother, I haven't necessarily seen, from my perspective, that you've had to compromise at all. It almost feels
really
like
nice.
you were always heading to this place, and now it's just been fulfilled, rather than, oh, now I'm going to have to basically become someone else and drop the art.
That's like the loveliest thing to hear, and I hope, not arrogantly, but I hope that that's how you feel about it, because that's how I feel about it. And it relates to what I was just saying about the sort of the decision. In a way, it both was a conscious decision to like carry on, because there have been times when it has been so hard that you're like, is this even worth it? Like, can I do this? I know lots of mother musicians, without even talking to all of them sometimes about it, and lots of them are more successful than me, and I just know that they have those moments and those struggles. Also, you don't see it as a sort of compromise, but it's more just like a kind of duality. I mean, that
integration.
Yeah, an integration, and it's like that's always what I think I'm aspiring to, is like bring them in, like a little bit like you do with an audience. Like, it's just a human experience, and whilst whilst they do like resent some of it, they resent you being away from them. They don't like it, you feel guilty. They don't like you being away from them. Interestingly, my daughter, who's only 4.5, but like worryingly sort of wise for her years and mature and articulate, you know, she's been coming to my gigs since COVID stopped, so since she was about 2. She's very much a COVID baby. She gets it. She like gets that it's like part of me, it's my lifeblood. You know, she sings a lot, we sing together a lot. It's just part of the like culture and like tapestry of home life. I'm sure there are families who separate it out more, and maybe that's healthier. I don't know.
I can't quite imagine you doing the separation. However, you know, healthy or not it might be from an outsider's perspective, I feel like you've actually sort of transcended regular expectations of what to do. And as with everything you approach, recording a record or fighting for those final squeaks at the end of a recording, it's like you have a vision for every aspect of your existence, your life and your family's life and everybody around you. And, you know, one of the things I've benefited from is your vision of my musicality and my career, where I might not have been able to conceive of a future that has actually sort of turned out. It's like you could see me before I could see myself almost.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only
skill.
thing I'd say about that is it's just kind of to do with loving someone, isn't it? It's that whole like cliche of like being seen and feeling met. And I didn't have anything like laid out for you in my head, but I think I just like loved you and respected you as a musician. And
you weren't afraid to say what you thought, which so many people would potentially just keep their opinions to themselves. But I totally trusted any suggestion, however left field it felt, came from a place of love and true kind of, you know,
like a
I'm
kind of
saying this because I see
understanding.
you.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. No, I definitely, but I wouldn't ever want it to have felt like I was sort of, it was prescriptive. Like I was like, oh, Jordan, you should do X, Y, Z. Yeah, it definitely felt like you have a totally extraordinary voice. Like, why aren't you singing?
Thank you. I mean, we spent so long
And
together
composing.
in backs of cars on tour in America, specifically in America, because that was very much like road heavy touring.
We did some flying tours as well, though, that were absolutely brutal.
That was very brutal.
Do you remember being sort of having like gone through like cancelled shows in Boston and snow blizzards and then being spat out in LA in the sunshine, and I had a full length fur coat, like fake fur, and it was just like, what's
25
going
degrees
on?
in February.
Put my neck out from carrying gear.
Oh my gosh. Those were the days.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we had so much fun. At that point, I don't think I'd ever had a relationship with a friend that was so close. Because obviously we were there to work effectively. And we're almost as close as siblings in a strange way.
Yeah, I think touring is a bit like that, really. It's like family because you're literally living together.
Yeah. And I felt like at the time, at least, because I'm much closer to my sister now, that I probably knew you better than I knew her.
Wow. 2018 we did some big touring, I think, because that was Shelter.
Was that Robert Plant kind of era?
No, that was earlier.
Oh, right.
No, Robert Plant was before my first record even came out.
Wow.
That was 10 years ago.
I'll have to look at my database of our gigs.
You mean in your brain?
No, it's starting
Big
to
data.
exist.
I mean, I kind of feel like I have it all in my brain.
You just remember everything. You
No,
don't need to
well,
write it down.
if I'm like going through a box of like old mementos and paperwork or something, sometimes, especially like really old tours, like even when I was like touring with a band like 07, like in those days, it wasn't all digital. So like we had a little tour book.
Wow.
And I found that and I was like, oh my my goodness, and all these venues, and some of them were really iconic venues that like nearly closed during COVID. And yeah, so I like reliving memories in that way, but I think I feel like I have it there.
You were definitely the center of that, and you were living it and experiencing it from a
Yeah,
very different
exactly.
perspective.
It was like,
to
and
me.
I was like
I was just a tag along.
wrangling the wrangles and struggling the.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You really went through it. You deserve every and any success that you have, because
Well,
you've
minor.
worked so hard for everything. It's incredible. One person we might not have mentioned today is Purcell. He's always there. Whenever
He's always there. He's my old bud.
whenever I'm teaching violin,
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about Baroque, composers, and yeah, Purcell is just, from my perspective, has never had the credit he deserves, but you definitely fully credit him, and clearly is sort of influential on lots of your musical choices.
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes back to that sort of wacky choir. We did Dido and Aeneas every year from like age 9 upwards. So I knew that opera very well. We did like the Baroque dances with it. So it was really sort of, it wasn't just like stiff classical representation of it. It's fun music. I was sort of taught to, experience it in a fun way.
Play. In a
Yeah.
not classical playing an instrument way. But
No, like playful and and dance. I mean, so much Baroque music like is dance music. Okay, it's for the courts, and we can sort of have another podcast about where the classical music's elitist and stuff. But I mean, part of the reason I love Purcell so much is that I'm sure if I were able to meet him, I would find him unpompous as a person. Because although him and I think even his father, like they were composers for the kings and the queens, and I just think he was tapping into kind of all the stratas of society. You just know that he was like listening to the folk songs. Interestingly, I just read the other day actually that his songs were sometimes turned into broadsides, because I always felt like, we're kind of taught that like classical composers are inspired by folk music, but actually I think with Purcell it was like a cyclical Chinese whisper thing.
I'm sure.
Like he was so sort of in tune with like real people and kind of what was being sung in the pub or like in the fields, not just in the courts for the kings or the church. He managed to write stuff that was so convincingly sort of raw that it then went back into sort of popular culture, which I think is very cool and very interesting. And I guess Mozart has that status, because even when we did Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, people think Mozart wrote that tune, but he didn't. It's a French folk song. But then he kind of loved it so much, and then he wrote theme and variations. And so, but anyway, I'm just wondering if there's other classical composers who write original material that is maybe sounds folky that then goes sort of back into the public sphere in that way.
I guess it's so long ago that, kind of speed of communication was just much more complex and person to person back then, rather than the separation.
He has a sort of special place in my musical heart, I think. First and second records have each got a track, much to my then label's chagrin. They didn't want them, or they didn't. I had to really fight to get those tracks on there, and I think they're two really great tracks. I'm really proud of those Purcell renditions. And then I did this huge St John Smith Square show that was like tried to create this kind of tableau with like samples of birdsong, and we had Chris Vatalara playing drums, didn't we? And Iestyn sang a duo with Iestyn Davis. But then since then, and I wrote a piece for The Guardian about him and spoke on Front Row and like had all this like great press, and the project sort of blew up a bit before I then did the Offer X record and Kronos Quartet record, and then made Shelter. So I had this kind of like blow up of like, I'm going to focus on Purcell, but partly actually because the record label weren't interested in that project, and I was on a record label, and kind of in a sense you're like owned by a record label. You're not allowed to just like go and make another record that they don't want. So I think that also dictated that I didn't like put those ideas down. And now I'm a free agent, and I just really feel like the time is right, and I just really want to. I have so many existing arrangements, but I also have some new ones. And also it comes back to what you were saying about the community thing. Like I feel like I haven't kind of put on record in the broadest sense, like these musical relationships. So someone like Ollie Coates maybe, who was kind of part of the original Purcell stuff that we were working on, Raki Singh, maybe even Matthew Truscott on violin, talking with Liam Byrne about having some gamba fretwork, actually really want to collaborate. Oh, and James McVinney on organ as well. I did a bit of a show with him and Ieston a few years ago, and that felt like the beginning of a really exciting relationship, because he's someone who's got a totally classical background, but he like mostly works with composers, but he like loves Purcell. Purcell for me would be a really perfect way of pulling in the sort of wider community of composer or composer-minded kind of players, you know, players who are just really like adept at moving between these like supposed barriers and genres. Taste comes into it, because I also feel like there is a place for this Purcell record of mine. When I sometimes go to listen to Baroque music, but Purcell in particular, I often find it hard to like find the recording in my head that I want to hear. It kind of often doesn't exist for particular songs.
Is that one of the things that compels you to make?
I mean, not in a like kind of egotistical sense. I just want to make it because I love the music and I love playing it. I am reminded, well, like, actually, no, the record would have a place in the world, because I don't think anyone represents his music in quite that way. Yeah. And there are a few early music groups and sort of opera singers who supposedly like do it in a less formal, less classical way, but that's when I feel like too much actual jazz creeps in, like actual jazz harmony, and I'm just like, that doesn't speak to me. So it's I mean, the reason I start going off on that is, you know, I'm saying, oh, just get musicians who just think it's all music is one music. And I was like, no, there's got to be a taste alignment. Yeah, exactly. So this isn't a total hippie free-for-all project. It's still got my sort of particular austerity to it, but freedom within that.
Do you have other like original song recording projects on the horizon?
Well, I mean, project, and as much as I've made 3 solo records and I know I'll make more, and I've got songs on the go, I've got a few songs I'm really excited about, but...
Send them to me! You're one of the only people who I would look forward to receiving a demo for and look forward to listening to it. No,
really?
I'm embarrassingly uncurious about music, and especially at demo level, but because of your just straight to the heart, straight to the point in terms of emotional performance. Whatever you've sent me in the past has always been like, that's it, just release it. Do you know what I mean?
In the sort of slow pace that I've had in my life of making stuff and making records, I feel like I've only just put out... Measured pace. I feel like I only just put out Circus of Desire, when actually the reality is I put it out last spring. It was also such a sort of big thing to put that record out myself and, you know, curate the whole project myself and curate the artwork and like figure out how to put it out into the world and sort of go back to being a self-releasing artist. It was such a affirming project to do, but it took a lot, and I had, you know, a very, very tiny baby when I was doing it all. So I guess what I'm saying is like, I don't feel like anxious about my next originals record. I know it will come, but I feel not anxious about Purcell, but like really hungry to do it.
Keen.
Like,
yeah, you have been teasing it a while.
Yeah, yeah, only like 10 years or something. Yeah. And then the other record I want to make, I have 3 records, is another folk rock orthorexy kind of a project, but with, again, the community thing, like amazing musicians that I know and I have worked with a long time ago here in the UK. I won't name names yet because I haven't like asked them yet, but it could be a really exciting lineup if I can procure the band that I have in mind.
I'm sure they'll say yes.
Yeah.
So what are your future plans for performing and playing live? Because that's not something that I'm very good at doing, playing live. I played live a lot because of playing with you, and I should definitely get my booty in gear about doing a gig of my own. What are you doing? What are you up to?
But can I just ask you a question though? Do you like playing solo live? There's a complicated answer maybe.
Over COVID or lockdowns, I started having singing lessons because I really felt like all of my songs were too hard for me. And I was like riding a coping mechanism that I'd created. And now that I've learned a little bit more about technique and now know just how little I know about technique, but feel much more comfortable about being able to build some stamina and
Yeah.
sustain a gig.
Yeah.
I'm more confident about it.
Okay, so basically
I'm not
the
against the
main
idea.
thing that made you not enjoy a gig was a kind of vocal anxiety in a way, like a worrying about your voice holding out for a whole show.
Yeah, my EP launch for Long Lost in 2018, which was the last big gig that I put on myself. I don't know how I kept going.
Really?
For an hour or whatever it was. Yeah, I did not have the chops. And now I understand how to do less and try and find more with less. Stop over singing, over blowing, over breathing.
Well, I don't think you're doing any of those things. I'm sure it's partly you just being too self-critical when you're there on stage. But a really interesting thing that I'm taking from that is, and I kind of relate to that, is I think partly like being a composer, probably having classical backgrounds as we both do, is that you do write sort of sometimes beyond your technical,
Exactly.
your
My ear can hear things that my voice doesn't know how to
Yeah.
produce. It doesn't come from that kind of improv culture of singing along to try and find a melody that goes with a backing track that the producer's made for you. And when I like trying to sing along to those kinds of songs, I'm like, oh, this is so much fun to sing. And it's so easy. And it's because it started with the voice.
Well, this takes me to my next point, is that maybe now with, I'm sure, and I some of the songs I wrote on Circus of Desire have a little bit of this.
Right.
It was to do with like guitar stuff. With Circus of Desire, I'd kind of set myself the challenge because I was so sick of touring with like insane guitar tunings and changes and worrying about string snapping and not being able to afford to take 3 guitars on the road. And so I was just like, I have to write the songs for this album in the same tuning, and it's almost going to be standard tuning, but I couldn't just do standard. It had 1 string different. Well, the only thing is it hasn't worked because now when I play a show and I want to do my back catalogue, I've still got the same problem because I've got 4 different tunings on each of the song in my first 2 records.
Yeah.
But anyway, it ties in with what you're saying because it's just that thing of your supposed technical limitation informing how you write, and it will be really interesting to see what songs you write now that you're sort of, let's say, embodying your voice more. You're really getting to know your voice more. You might actually end up writing in a way that feels more comfortable. And I tried to do that a bit with some songs with the guitar on Circus of Desire, because I feel like that as a guitarist. I'm just always like, I can hardly hold the chords to the end of the song.
And do you have an upcoming event where you will have to hold the chords till the end of the song on a stage in front of people?
I think it will be you and I playing Purcell in Britton Piers, where we first met. So that's going to be like totally amazing.
That'd be so nice.
In August.
Let's go back to emotions.
My forte.
Yeah, that's another reason why we get on so well. The kind of mutual therapy sessions.
Yeah.
For you, deep down, what's the point?
For me, to move people to sort of, maybe shuffle the more uptight people out of their uptight selves and get them into their emotional state for people who aren't maybe so like us and like in tune with their emotions or whatever. And then sometimes it depends what song it is, but like sometimes I have maybe, whilst I try and avoid being like a political artist, there are sometimes subtexts in my songs that are like a kind of not a provocation, but a sort of just like a little nudge, like just trying to make people, sometimes to make them think, but mostly to try and make them feel what they might be feeling. Through that, hopefully, some kind of sublimation, some kind of transcendence, like not think. And, well, I guess it gets onto sort of spiritual realms. I'm always wary of talking about that because then starts to make you sound like you're trying to play God as a musician on stage. But it's more like, I don't really know how to think of it in sort of Western terms, but it makes me think of like how people talk about some, like, I don't know, South Indian classical music. Like I remember spending time with these tabla players and they're like, the music is to sort of try and communicate with the gods. It's like,
Yeah.
I feel like musicians are here to, and artists of pretty much any kind, ideally we're like portals for other lay people to access that. But obviously, like a lot of the time, I guess I feel like there's the genius heroes and heroines who you watch a recording of them and you're just like, they are doing it all the time.
From my perspective, you're doing it all the time. And I have to thank you for sharing your art with the world, but also for all the incredible hard work and persistence just in the logistical side that it takes to get to that point where you can share your art with the world. Because that's really the hard stuff that, you know, grinds you down sometimes, and you always push through. And
that, I feel like I have to really credit my family for that. Like, I've seen with people very, very close to me who don't come from like a culture as in their familial culture, where if they haven't had two key things, which is to sort of nurture your creative abilities and tend the flame of sort of self-belief, it's what it all comes back to. And it's really hard. And there is no artist that's like ever lived who hasn't suffered the self-doubt and had wrangles with logistics. And it's like, whether you read sort of Michelangelo's diary entries, or it's just like, it's always there. It's sort of, and actually Bob Dylan's autobiography, his Chronicles, that was one of the best things I read about that, because it's like, even someone like him who is now, he's not going to be in this earthly world for much longer. This movie's come out, he's having this kind of huge resurgence. He's back out playing shows. My dad just saw him play a gig recently. He's like this mythical figure, but he's like actually human. He just writes about like repeated blocks, vocal blocks, worrying that he couldn't like deliver something vocally, worrying that he didn't have another song in him, like many, many phases. And so it's that, you know, it's really important to share those feelings as artists, because then you're reminded like, oh, everyone feels that self-doubt. I definitely feel like that was a really key thing, that my upbringing, and even like generation, like my grandfather was like really mathematician and a poet, and one of his poems I set on Circles of Desire, Zero Sum, and he just was always like, he'd just pat me gently on the back and be like, you know, be kind to yourself, he would always say, which I'm really shit at, but he would say it really specifically in the realm of like creativity.
yeah,
So
medicine for us all.
Yeah, and I think that's why I just like always sort of push through. Anyway.
Oh, that's a beautiful note to end on. And thank you for sharing so vulnerably.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and review this podcast. And if you like it, share it with your friends or on social media. You can find me on social platforms at Deep Down with Jordan Hunt and at Jordan Hunt Music. Deep Down uses bits of my music from my song Ocean Floor, and you can listen to my music on all streaming services. I'd love to hear from you via DM or via my website, jordan-hunt.com, if any of these experiences resonated with you, and there you can sign up to the mailing list for announcements and updates. Thank you so much for listening.